Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this bill, Bill C87, the opportunity for all, Canada's first poverty reduction strategy. That is the title. The 6-page document is exactly what we see. Not a lot there. This poverty reduction strategy is truly a re-announcement of 87 programs that this government either put into place, have modified, or have been around for decades. So let's not kid ourselves when we sit there and talk about a poverty reduction strategy. It's a re-announcement of things that have happened since October of 2015. That is all we're seeing here. What they have done in this bill, they've talked about the fact that they put in a metric. And I was listening to the member from I was listening to the member from Spadina, and he was talking about using this new measurement. I just want to let him know, and all Canadians that know, this measurement has been used for decades. I do applaud them for actually adopting it as the official measurement, but please do not believe that this was something that they've concocted and created. This measurement has been used by the Human Resources and Skills Development Department for years. So I just want to share that. You know, there are 4 key things that I want to focus on here today. I want to look at, and to begin, is the current poverty rates. Canadians believe, last week we had the financial update from our finance ministers. And, Canadians, when I'm reading the comments coming on Twitter and Facebook, they will support a government who runs a deficit if they believe that the money is being spent well, and it's being spent that is being in need. And that is one of the biggest things, and one of the biggest challenges I see here. We have a government that has announced an $80 billion deficit in their mandate. But if we're looking at what they've spent and what the actual statistics are showing, there are 2 absolutely different stories. And I want to start off with just what the parliamentary secretary said moments ago. The poverty reduction strategy started the day that we took office. So the facts that I'm going to give you today are going to be comparing data from 2014, the last year of our Harper government and Conservative government, compared to the 2016 year, the full year of when this government took place, noting that this government was working on poverty from October 19th of 2015 on. What the information shows is that the level of poverty for all persons remains at 13%. So the data between 2014 and 16, 13%, no variation in those numbers whatsoever, but an $80 billion deficit. All persons under the age of 18, we see with all of this, they talk about the Canada Child Benefit, we have seen a 0.5% decrease based on this, but we see an $80 billion deficit. Persons between the ages of 18 and 64, there have been very minor and insignificant changes. We see a change of about 1%. The one that really scares me, and will scare many of my members of the members of my caucus, especially since we really focused on seniors and the push to make sure we had a seniors minister because we thought that this government was not focusing on seniors, we were right. We have now seen an increase between 2014 and 2016 of a 2% increase for people over the age of 65 when it comes to poverty. But we also see an $80 billion deficit. What I'm trying to show here are these lines of we are spending the money on the people that need it. And I myself will sit there and say, I am the first one to want to help somebody. But these numbers are not showing any changes, but instead they're showing deficit spending, and we're not getting these results for it. So that is one of the biggest challenges that I see here. How can we support something when we're seeing no different? And that's where it comes back to this page on the metrics. As we talked about the 6-page bill, the metrics are not there. The targets are not there. The new data that we have received, we recognize that they're collecting data, and I want to share with you some information. I've had the opportunity as the Shadow Minister for Families, Children and Social Development to go across Canada, very much different but the same, and speak to these people on the ground. A couple weeks ago, I was actually in Hamilton and at the Canadian Association to End Homelessness. One of the biggest discussions there was the point-in-time count. So we want to compare the 2016 and the 2018. That is, something, when it came out in 2016, yes, I think it is really important to collect that data. We need to know what is leading to homelessness. We need to know how many people are there. So if we have these numbers, we actually know, have we reduced it? Has it increased? So, I'm okay with that. But what we have heard from the ground are people coming out and saying, we were told to do one thing in 2016, and then point in time count, we were actually told not to go to these areas. I actually heard these from people that were doing point in time counts. They were not told not to go to those areas because poverty was flourishing. because those streets had people that were homeless, and they didn't want those people in the count. This is something that was coming down to the people that were working for the Government of Canada, telling them not to go into those areas where poverty had increased. I also have heard from the people in Kelowna. Kelowna was a really interesting trip that I had, and I sat and spoke to people at Blue Sky, and they're doing absolutely fantastic work. But they shared with me the concern that they did the point-in-time count in 2016 and 2018, and what they also did was a list, a name list, something that's a really wonderful measurement on this that we can talk more about in another discussion. But what they said was the factors that they got in 2016 and 18 through the point-in-time count endorsed by this government, it's a 24-hour window. So let's say John, who's been on that street corner for 364 days asking for assistance, let's say he happens to not be on that corner that day, his name does not count because he is not there in that 24-hour period. So what we see is we are doing these counts, we're doing them in a very micro amount of time, and when the same organizations from Kelowna are going out and doing a name count, we see that those numbers actually almost quadrupled. That they actually are saying the point-in-time count will show less than 100. But when we did our name count, where we actually go out on the streets, we're talking about 400 people. That is a huge, significant difference. So, I mean, if we're going to talk metrics, let's make sure that we're getting our metrics straight. Let's be sure that the measurements that we're using are going to be the same from one year to another year, and then we're not putting in some challenges there so that we get different results. But one thing that I also heard that was really, really important was, you keep on counting us, but we still don't have a home. So this is something that I want to bring to the attention of the Minister and the Parliamentary Secretary and the in-government, that it is lovely to collect this data, but the people that are being asked for this data, they want to start seeing results. They're being tired of doing these things and not seeing anything at the end of the day. I now want to switch the page and talk about the National Housing Strategy. We have had some private members' bills that have come through this, so we've had the opportunity to talk about housing in those areas, but let's actually talk about what the National Housing Strategy does. Over 1/3 of this announcement is not new money. It's money that we saw that was put in the 2016 and 17 budgets. So when we talk about the National Housing Strategy, we're looking at old money and we're looking at some new money. A substantial portion requires provincial money. So when they're talking about $40 billion, it's not $40 billion coming from Canadians, it's $40 billion from the Canadian government. It is something that has to have matching. And you know something, we have to make sure that those provincial governments are going to be at the table. Now, agreements have been signed, and kudos on that, but we also have to make sure that these are agreements that these provinces are not being forced to make. But the need for housing, and this is one of my biggest concerns, the need for housing is now. We have heard our NDP colleagues talk about the need for housing, and I recognize that we still see these challenges. We know that shelter use in Canada has actually increased under this government. It has not decreased, it's increased. So more people are needing shelters. And what we look at is the strategy that goes from 2016 and then up to about 2029 with this $40 billion over 10 years. What we see is it's end-loaded. The emergency is today. The emergency isn't 10 years from now. Are we saying a person who's lived on the streets for 2 years, add 12, you're going to get your money there? So we also have to look at that. So some of my biggest concerns is we're throwing money at things, but we're really not solving the problem. And right now in the Status of Women Committee, we are studying shelters. We have had some fantastic witnesses that have come in, and if we're looking at where the housing issues are, we have to look at the actual housing continuum. We have to look at the shelters. We have to look at the subsidized housing. We have to look at the affordable housing and the supportive housing. And then we also have to look at what is actually attainable for Canadians. One of the biggest challenges that we're seeing, and this is something that this government has not addressed, we see that people are being kept in shelters because there is not room to move out of that continuum. Now, just a little news alert, every day somebody is looking for a shelter across Canada. There's always people looking for help, whether it's women that are leaving abused relationships or people who just cannot financially support themselves in their housing. They're looking for places. But the continuum of housing is broken, and this government continues to allow it to be broken and continues to expand the problem. So when somebody goes to look for an affordable housing, I can tell you of a young woman that's moved into a place in June, into a second-stage housing. She is stuck in second-stage housing because there is no housing available for her to go to. The housing markets are not there. So when we look at the National Housing Strategy, we can talk about affordable, but what is the plan to actually get affordable housing built? What is the plan to break down and make sure that we're working with all of our communities, from the developers and the landowners to the people who are actually out there with the hammers? We have seen huge gaps, and this government is not addressing it. I want to give you a few quotes, because I think the thing is, we talk about these all the time, but there's a few quotes I wanted to share with you, because reality check is here. From CBC News, posted on June 13th of 2018. Quote, between 2014 and 2017, chronic homelessness in the city climbed by 21%, while the use of emergency shelters rose by 16%. So under this government, in the city of Ottawa, we have seen an increase of 21% of chronic homelessness increased. So how is this government talking about that? Same quote, or same source, and a second quote. This report, titled Homelessness in Ottawa, A Roadmap for Change, examines how the city's 10-year plan is faring and offers suggestions on how to turn the tide. While the report contains some good news, 577 people were able to move into their own homes since 2015, thanks to the city's use of Housing First model. Deans acknowledges Ottawa is not trending in the right direction. So we're talking about a document that was just put out that's looking at housing from 2014 to 2017, and the people from Ottawa are saying we are not going in the right direction, and this is under this government. I want to share with you a few quotes also talking about Housing First, because I think, we really, when we speak to this government, they'll talk about Housing First, and let's be honest, the reason they don't like it is because the Conservatives put it in. It's that simple. We see many of our pieces of legislation that were done between 2006 and 15 that have been repealed only because it was Conservative policy. Exactly. So I want to read to you a few items, and these are really important and critical points. From the Mental Health Commission's final report, over the 2-year period after participants entered the study, every $10 invested in Housing First services resulted in an average savings of $9.60 for high needs. Significant cost savings were realized for the 10% of participants who had the highest cost at study entry. For this group, the intervention cost was $19,582 per person per year on an average. Over the 2-year period following study entry, every $10 invested in Housing First services resulted in an average savings of $21.72. From the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, this is Tim Richter who is speaking on this. People across Canada will know who, if they're working in housing, they'll understand who he is, and I recognize that the Parliamentary Secretary knows who he is as well. He has indicated, we won't prevent and reduce chronic homelessness in Canada without Housing First, and that removing the Housing First investment target could be risky because communities may drift away from the Housing First investments, harming efforts to reduce homelessness. And finally, the last quote on this one, from the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy. Quote, strongly objects to the government policy decision to remove the Housing First investment target, and says that reaching home leaves open the door for federal funding to be diverted towards homelessness intervention that are neither evidence-based or practice-based. So I just wanted to bring up that information, because we can sit there and talk about what a great deal they're doing in the National Housing Strategy and applaud and all of these kind of things, but we have people on the ground who actually face homelessness every day, face clients every day, and this is the reports that we're getting back. So I said that was my final quote on that, but it is not, because it was interesting last night. We were on a panel on CTV, and we're talking about the emergent crisis that we have with immigration and the cost, and the PBO came out indicating that over the 2-year period from July of 2017 till March of 2019, if this government stays on track, that they are going to spend $1.1 billion. And so I think we really need to concentrate on the fact that we have a government that has no true policies for the people that come into this country and do not have a plan on how we're actually going to assist these new immigrants into Canada. And so from a quote from Toronto, Toronto has seen a spike in refugee claimants in shelters this year, with an average nightly numbers climbing to 3,191 this month, more than 6 times the level of 2 years ago. Toronto Mayor John Tory has issued increasingly urgent calls for additional funding from federal and provincial government. He says 41% of those in the city's already strained shelter system are now refugee claimants. By November, this share is projected to be hit 54%. As a result, for the first time, the city is temporarily housing people in student residences at 2 community colleges, spaces that are filling up fast. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, of course, yesterday with the PBO report, we recognize that the cost of new immigrants into this country is basically on average of what a minimum wage worker will make over a course of 1 year. And that is what our government is spending because they do not have a plan. And I wish they would start listening to what Canadians are actually saying. Now, I want to, for a few minutes, actually turn it to a positive note. The Social Finance Fund was something that was put in the mini budget last week. Although it was supposed to be an economic review, there was a heck of a lot of spending that we saw there. And the Social Finance Fund in the fall economic statement proposes to make available $755 million on a cash basis over the next 10 years to establish a social finance fund with an additional $50 million over 2 years in an investment and readiness stream. You know, I look at these things because this is something our government actually started studying in 2011, in 2013, and in 2015 it was in our federal budget. So this is something that Conservatives do believe in. But part of the problem that I have here is, first, where are the Liberal government going to find this money? We are already talking about an $80 billion deficit, and now we're talking about what we're going to do next. So that is one of my concerns. We also have to remind ourselves that 10-year program, let's see when that money is being spent. If we're talking about social programs being financed through this social finance fund to help urgency that includes homelessness, this money is once again backloaded and does not appear for the first 2 years in this mandate. So I think that's really important. This is money that is spent after the 2019 election. Like everything else this government proposes, it is spent after the election so that they can have their platform for their 4-year mandate. So these are really huge concerns for me as well. The child benefits is something that they will constantly talk about, and this is what we hear about, the Canada Child Benefit. It's lifted 300,000 children out of poverty. And you know, anything that we can do to help our children, we will always support. But we also have to make sure that what they're doing is on the right track. And part of my concern is, if they're saying they're doing all of these things, and we see less than 0.5% in decrease in child poverty, we've got a problem. I really want to just sum this up today, that this current government is truly on a poor track. They have a poor track record, and program performance is just horrendous. We support measures that support to reduce poverty and provide a fulsome approach. We oppose the carbon tax because we know the carbon tax is actually going to be one thing that is in addition to these low-income people that they have to spend money on. And this is because this government is coming out with one of their policies, and it's not a climate change policy, it is an economic, it is a social engineering policy. There is nothing there that says this is what's going to happen, because I'm going to tell you that the train that does not go from my house to my workplace, I won't be able to take. It doesn't exist. Like any other consumer, I will be in my automobile, like many Canadians that do not have public transit. We will be in our automobiles, we will be gassing up, and we will be paying 11 cents more a litre because of this government. And I applaud the provincial government of Ontario for banning this ridiculous carbon tax. But I want to sum it up with my final saying. We have a program, we have something that's come out with 87 different programs. In the last few months, we have seen GM this week, 2,800 jobs. We have some Bombardier, 5,000 jobs. And we cannot forget about the people in Alberta. 110,000 jobs in Alberta have been lost because of this Prime Minister and because of Bill C-69 and because of these ridiculous policies that they look at what they want, but they don't look at what Canadians want and what Canadians need, and they need jobs. And I'm asking, out of this entire poverty reduction strategy, how come we're not talking about how we can stay competitive in Canada, how we can retain jobs here in Canada, and how we can create jobs here in Canada? We don't see that in the 87. We know poverty has many, many ways of looking at that, and there's many different pillars. One of the pillars is actually strong fiscal economy with job creation. We do not see job creation, and you can say over there that you get it, but we do not. If we see job creation, we wouldn't have 110,000 people in Alberta losing their jobs. If this government was worried about poverty reduction, they would be putting in initiatives that keep people working in Canada and not putting in them to the employment insurance. Employment insurance is not the option that Canadian workers are looking for. They're looking to go to work every day. They're looking at putting bread and butter on their tables for their families. Their job is to go out there and get a job as a family member, to be able to do this for their families. So I say, Bill C-87, it's gutless. It's worse than what Seinfeld would say. It's filled with nothing. And if you're really talking about helping people with poverty, where is the guts?